one with the way he handled it. And what I'm curious, Brian, if you know the answer, has Savannah been angry about this? We haven't seen any frustration. A family member dealing with this, you would think would be out there screaming, why is this sheriff mismanaging this?
Yeah, I've wondered about that, what she's really thinking. I think, you put yourself in her shoes, you got to be careful because the sheriff is still in charge of the investigation. And if she goes public and, criticizes the sheriff, that becomes a whole story of its own and sort of takes attention off of Nancy. And you got to imagine behind the scenes, she's a very smart lady. She's a lawyer. She's covered all sorts of cases. I'm sure she's not happy, but I think she's just being careful because she wants to keep the focus on the investigation and doesn't want to interfere in any way. That's my take.
Yeah. Let's take a look at Brian's special. We got a little clip here.
But something happened before that dinner. Something that nobody in that family has addressed publicly. A conversation took place between Nancy and her daughter Annie about money. Nancy had something Annie wanted, and Nancy said no. An 84-year-old woman ordered an Uber alone on a Friday evening. She was going to her daughter's house for dinner. She never made it home alive. At 5:32 p.m. on January 31st, Nancy Guthrie climbed into that car in Tucson, Arizona. She was sharp. She was independent. She had lived in her Catalina foothills home for decades. Every Sunday, she sat in the same pew at her church. Every night, she removed her hearing aids and went to sleep in silence, completely alone, completely vulnerable. That Friday evening felt like any other. Dinner with family, a warm house, people who knew her. If you are new to Crime Orbit, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This case is accelerating, and you do not want to miss what is coming. That refusal may be the last real power Nancy Guthrie ever held, because 14 hours after her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home that night. With no camera recording the trip, no witness watching the door, no independent verification of any kind, Nancy was gone. Not missing, not wandered off, gone. A masked figure appeared on her porch at 1:47 in the morning. By 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker disconnected from her phone. She had been moved so far from her nightstand that the Bluetooth signal could no longer reach her. 3 months later, no arrest has been made. But this week, a financial trail surfaced that changes every single question investigators should be asking. And we are going to follow it all the way to the end. Before we get to what law enforcement is hiding, we need to start where this case actually starts. Not February 1st, 8 months earlier, with a document most families never sign. In May of 2025, Tommaso Cioni signed a durable power of attorney. That document gave his wife Annie legal control over his financial and property matters. 8 months before Nancy vanished, legal experts who reviewed it publicly said it was routine. The kind of paperwork that gets signed during a mortgage closing or a property transfer. And maybe that is exactly what it was. But here is what makes it impossible to ignore. The timing places it inside a sequence. And that sequence has a direction. Nancy Guthrie's Catalina foothills home sits at approximately $1 million in value. That is public record. Annie and Tommaso's home, 4 miles away, is valued at roughly $650,000. A $350,000 gap between the mother's house and the daughter who lived nearest to her. On its own, that gap means nothing. But nothing in this case exists on its own. According to a report by Hayden Times, Annie asked Nancy for a loan sometime before January 31st. The amount is unknown. The reason is unknown. Nancy said no. That is the first documented moment of financial tension between a mother and the daughter who would be the last person to see her. So hold that sequence in your mind. Power of attorney signed in May. Loan request denied before January 31st. Dinner on January 31st, hosted by the daughter who was just refused. Tommaso drives Nancy home on a route with zero independent documentation. And then 14 hours of complete silence from people who live 4 miles away and knew exactly how vulnerable Nancy was alone in that house. Then the photographs surfaced. People loading boxes into vehicles outside Nancy's home. Annie's Honda CR-V visible in those images. No death certificate has been issued. No probate has been opened. No court has authorized anyone to remove a single item from the home of a woman whose disappearance is still an active federal criminal investigation. And Annie's CR-V was not just photographed at the property. It was seized by law enforcement and held for over 40 days of forensic examination. 40 days. Standard vehicle processing does not take 40 days. That is the timeline of a vehicle being examined for something specific, something biological. Now we get to the piece of evidence that a retired detective says is being locked away for one reason only: a trial. Here is what we know about the call that Annie made, and the 7 minutes before she made it. At 11:56 a.m. on February 1st, Annie arrived at her mother's home. At 12:03 p.m., she called 911. 7 minutes passed between those two moments. 7 minutes inside the home of a missing 84-year-old woman before anyone picked up a phone. In Arizona, 911 recordings are public record. Journalists can request them. In almost every high-profile missing person case, that recording surfaces within days. 3 months into this investigation, nobody has heard what Annie said. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam addressed this directly. He said, "There is probably investigative information on that recording that detectives do not want the public to hear." He said not to hold your breath waiting for it. And then he said the recording may not surface until a trial date approaches. A trial. That word does not appear in cases going cold. Now we promised you the full picture of what this case has been hiding. So here are the 5 things that make that sealed. 911 call the most significant piece of evidence in this investigation. 1. Annie is the caller. Her voice, her word choice, her emotional register, all of it is captured. 2. The 7-minute gap precedes the call. Whatever happened in those minutes may be audible in the background. 3. Arizona law makes this a public record. The only reason to seal it is investigative necessity. 4. Retired Detective Gilliam specifically connected the seal to a future trial, not ongoing sensitivity. A trial means charges. Charges mean a named suspect. 5. What a first-time arrival would not know. If Annie described details inside that home before a dispatcher asked, details only someone with prior knowledge could have, that recording becomes evidence of awareness she should not have had. We also promised you the institutional signal that tells you exactly where this case is heading. Here it is. NBC News built a specific protocol for the Today Show. If news about Nancy breaks during a live broadcast, Savannah Guthrie is pulled from the set immediately. A different anchor delivers the story on camera. That protocol was activated on April 15th. Savannah was removed mid-broadcast. Networks do not build those systems for cases they believe are going cold. Drop your theory in the comments right now. What do you think Annie said in those 7 minutes before she dialed? Because the DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home came back through the federal database with no match. Whoever left biological material in that house has never been arrested, has never been convicted, is living, right now, what looks like a completely ordinary life. The FBI ran the DNA collected from Nancy's home through CODIS, the federal criminal database. It came back empty, no match. That result eliminates an entire category of suspect. No career criminal, no drifter, no one previously processed by the justice system. The person who left biological material inside Nancy Guthrie's home has a clean record. They live without suspicion. They may sit across from people at dinner and no one would ever know. DNA analyst C.C. Moore assessed the samples. Her finding was this: Nancy's DNA was present, along with 2 or more unidentified contributors, not one unknown person. Multiple people inside that home whose identities have not been established. This is where 2 experts disagree, and that disagreement matters. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam believes at least 2 people were required to move Nancy. She had limited mobility. Moving her through a house, past a security gate, into a vehicle, silently at 2 a.m., Gilliam said, "That is too complex an operation for one person to manage without waking her." Former FBI agent Jim Clement assessed the blood pattern on the front steps and reached a different conclusion. He said, "A single suspect is more likely. A second person would have prevented Nancy from ending up on the ground outside. One of them is right, and the answer may already exist in a laboratory in San Francisco. The same forensic lab that helped build the case against Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, is potentially processing evidence from this case. Astria Forensics. That is not the lab you send evidence to when you are running out of ideas. That is the lab you send evidence to when you are building a prosecution. If Crime Orbit is giving you information you are not getting anywhere else, subscribe right now. Turn on notifications. When this case breaks, this channel will have it first. The person this evidence describes is not a stranger to Nancy's home. They knew the cameras, they knew the gate, they knew the patio, they knew her schedule, her medication, her hearing aids, and the exact window when she would be completely unreachable. That is not a burglar. That is someone who had been watching. Gilliam says 2 people. Clement says 1. What do you think the DNA is going to confirm? Tell us below. 3 months, no arrest, no named suspect. But the investigation has not gone quiet because it ran out of leads. It has gone quiet for a very different reason, and that reason has a word: assembly. On May 1st, the 3-month mark of Nancy's disappearance, Sheriff Nanos appeared in a short video clip. No press conference, no new evidence. One statement. He said, "Someone out there knows what happened. Call us." That is the public face of a department sitting on something it cannot yet disclose. Here is where this case stands right now. The DNA results from Astria Forensics are pending. The 911 call remains sealed. No death certificate exists for Nancy Guthrie. No probate has been opened on her estate. Boxes have left her property without legal authorization. And the person whose vehicle was held for 40 days of forensic examination has not been named as a suspect publicly. Every open thread in this case points in the same direction, and none of them have been closed. Here is the detail that stays with us at Crime Orbit more than any other. On the morning of February 1st, Nancy did not appear in her usual seat during her church's Sunday morning live stream. A friend noticed the empty chair. That friend made the call that started everything. Not a family member, Not the daughter who had dinner with her the night before. Not the son-in-law who drove her home. A church friend, watching a live stream, noticing an absence. Before January 31st, Nancy looked at her daughter and said no. That conversation has never been confirmed on the record. It has never been denied. But if it happened, it may have been the last moment of real authority Nancy Guthrie ever exercised. Nancy's own church friend noticed before her family did. Leave one word in the comments that describes what that tells you. The answer to this case is not missing. It is being assembled. And when it is ready, subscribe to Crime Orbit and turn on notifications. Because when this breaks, and it will break, you will hear it here first.